Welcome to Blue Glasses Math. In this podcast, we will explore how our self-perception as math teachers and learners influences our approach to life. Whether you identify as a math enthusiast or not, this podcast is for you. Are you a teacher, a parent, a school administrator, or a student? Join me as we shift our perspective on what it means to be a math person. Let's take a look. Well, good morning and welcome, Jen Dalton. I have Jen Dalton here today on Blue Glasses Math, and I'm so thrilled to have you here to talk about how you teach math in the school that you work in. Is it in? It's in the Northeast, right? The
Yes,
school
in Marlborough, Massachusetts.
Marlborough, Mass. So, what part of Massachusetts is that in?
Sort of central, so we're kind of right around the intersection of the Mass Pike and 495. So we're not so far west as Worcester, but not so far east as Boston.
Got it. Awesome. It must be beautiful there this time of year. We're recording in August, and just when it's starting to get cooler.
Yeah, nice cool morning this morning. So
awesome. Well, again, I thank you so much for being here today. We got connected through a mutual contact, and this podcast is all about how we see ourselves as math learners, and how we help and as teachers, how we see ourselves as math learners and doers, and also how we help our students see themselves as math learners. And I always start with the question, because I think this is so important, is what is your math story? What brought you to this space? And it can be any time in your career. It could be from elementary school. It could be something that happened when you were teaching. What is the math story that influences what you do today?
So I think the biggest thing that came to mind when you asked me to think about this question was actually right when I was starting college. I went to college not thinking I was going to be a math major, not particularly thinking I'd go into teaching. I was actually thinking about psychology. But I'd always been good at math, so I knew it would be part of my courses because I enjoyed it. And I had a class that was team taught by two professors. And the two of them just encouraged me every day to sort of to think about being a math major. You know, as one was teaching, the other one would sit there and like, Jen, are you thinking about a math major? I really think you would be good at it. I really think that this would be something for you. And I think without the encouragement of those, especially I think, this was back in 1990, right? And so to be a woman in mathematics, like it wasn't all that common. And to have two male professors who took that sort of an interest in me, like at that stage, and saw something in me and took the time to sort of encourage and sort of playfully nudge me in that direction. I think that I don't know that I would have gone this direction had it not been for them.
That's amazing. I love the terminology you just said, playfully nudge me. So what's something, can you give an example of, other than their banter of asking you to be a math major? Is there something specific that you remember, or a moment that you can give us an example of what the playful banter may have looked like?
So, we would have a little daily quiz in that class. So every day we'd have a little 3-point quiz that was just to check our understanding from the next day. And as they would go around and hand them back, they would hold it up in the air and say, are you going to be a math major? Before they would give it back to me. So it would be became this running joke every day in class. And I had them for 2 semesters. So by the time I was getting to the end of my freshman year, I really was deeply considering it and was enjoying that class more than some of the others that I thought I was going to be really loving. And so, by the time I'd started my sophomore year, I had declared a math major.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And it sounds like, I love the word playful also. It seems like they were, playfully encouraging you in a way that was very welcoming and authentic,
Mm-hmm.
which sounds amazing. Awesome. All right. So tell me, so you are currently a high school math teacher. All right. So let's talk about the work that you do with the students at New England
Innovation Academy.
New England Innovation Academy. Awesome.
So we are still a fairly new school. We are about to start year 5. I'm in the middle of the opening meetings right now, getting ready for the launch of year 5. I was a founding math teacher there, so I came on board before we opened, and myself and another teacher kind of developed our curriculum together. And one of the things we really wanted to emphasize was connections to other disciplines, real world applications of the things we were doing. And because we are actually a competency based school rather than a traditional grading school, we wanted to really think about what are the skills that you would need as a mathematician, much more so than content knowledge. So, not to dismiss content knowledge, because that's also important, but really like how can we get at the crux of like what does it mean to think like a mathematician, what does it mean to behave like a mathematician, and if we kind of maybe remove some of the guardrails that we've had in all of our previous life as math teachers, like starting from scratch, like what could we might imagine for ourselves and for the school.
That's awesome. All right, so let's talk about that before we even get into what you do. So how did you decide or how did you determine what a mathematician actually does? Because I think part of the reason why I started this podcast is because when I go out in the real world, a real quote unquote real world, and I talk to anybody who is not an educator or necessarily thinking that they do math in their daily lives, they'll say things to me like, "Oh my gosh, you teach math?" My God, when I taught middle school, they're like, "Oh, you teach math to middle schoolers? Like, you must be nuts," right? And then the other response I get is, "Or you must be really smart." And I'm like, huh, there is this perception that to be a mathematician, it's like you've got to be this, if you put it into Google to like give you images of mathematicians, and I haven't tried it recently, but it's usually like an old white man with lots of big frizzy hair, kind of like looking like Einstein, right? And I really hope, and I think that it's starting to happen, is people are starting to realize, oh, there's other things that you can look like. There's other ways you can look to be a mathematician. And it's not just somebody standing at a big giant whiteboard with a bunch of equations that almost three in the people in the world can understand. So what does it mean to be a mathematician in your how you developed your ideas?
Yeah, so I'll kind of start with like we have three math specific competencies that we use to assess students. And so that was part of like the groundwork where we started. Like, what are the things that we might most often want to assess students on. And so our three are one is like, I attend to precision. And that's all about like, can you follow a process and, not do things like 2 + 3 = 6, or drop negative signs. These are important things because like getting to an answer, while it's not everything, is part of being a mathematician. Our second one is I determine, which it really is like, all right, you've got like a whole bunch of math tools in your toolbox now, and you've got a problem in front of you. Like, do you know which tool to pick up and to start using to solve that problem? So maybe you have students who are like really good at like, oh, I recognize this is a quadratic. I know I'm going to need to use this quadratic formula, but they can't for the life of them like keep from making all kinds of like sign mistakes and things. But I can still assess them on like, okay, you knew what to do. I can see that. So you can get sort of a high sort of level of proficiency in that competency, even if you're kind of falling down on the attending to precision. Right. So those are our two. And then the third one, which I think like all mathematicians love, is I justify, which means like, can you show your work fully, completely, using correct mathematical language, sometimes using the English language and explaining an answer? Can you really sort of show us how you got from here to here without just writing down like x = 5 and no explanation, which I know is the bane of every math teacher.
Yes, I transitioned from show your work to show me your thinking because
Yes.
I need to understand how your brain is working. And I used to say this all the time to my eighth graders that I do not have some type of tool that can get inside your brain. And so the justification piece became so important to me because it helped me inform what I was going to do next. And that's great. So, but all of these attending to precision, determining the tools, I determine and I justify, just wrote all these down. All of these competencies are also what we need in real life to do a lot of things outside of math, even.
Oh, for sure. And I think that's one of the things we really like about the way we do things at our school is that, these are the math specific ones, but someone in science might use one of our competencies on one of their assessments. I might use a humanities competency on one of mine because if I'm doing word problems, maybe I want a different type of, maybe, I don't just want those three math ones. Maybe I want something else. Maybe I want them to look to construct meaning, right? So we have an I construct competency. Sometimes I want them up at the board, like explaining to me. And then we have like an I express or I present, where they're really like honing in on all of these different skills that you need like across disciplines. Because, in the real world, as we're always talking about, like you're never in a little silo in the real world. You're always using a little bit of this, a little bit of that. I need some math here. I need some humanities skills there. I need a little science. You need like this whole giant thing. And trying to like break down those walls between disciplines is a big kind of ethos of our school that we're trying to be better about.
I love that. And I think you mentioned earlier just the connections between the different curricular topics. It sounds to me from this brief part of this conversation is that you're mastering that in everything that you do, and it seems like it's so much more than like real world math, right? So we hear all the time, give your students real world math problems. So what do people do? They say, oh, okay, well, these kids live in the farm country, so we're going to talk about hay bales or whatever. That's not really the idea, right? The idea is, like you said earlier, what are the competencies that we're going to use to become a functioning human, a functioning adult? Because that's what we need now more than ever. Awesome. Cool. All right. So let's dive into, before we to hit record, we were talking about some of the actual specific things you do in the classroom. And one of the things that came up was about a project you did around the Globe Theater, which for those people who are listening to this, the Globe Theater was where Shakespeare in England had his performances back in London, back in, I don't know when, I don't know what the year was, 1800, something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, in that
In
range.
that range? Okay, okay. Not really good at history, so.
Well, so this is a project that came up purely kind of by chance. So I happened to be sharing a classroom with one of our humanities teachers, and I was teaching ninth grade at the time. So kind of a heavy geometry unit I was in the middle of. And I was feeling a little like not overly excited about the lesson plan I had for it. It was a little dry, and we were talking about polygons, and I'm like, oh, the stuff we need to get through, but like I wished I had a way to like jazz it up a little bit. And so the other teacher happened to have a model of the Globe Theater sitting on his desk in the classroom we shared, and I was like, well, that's a really interesting shape. And so I just messaged him and so like, hey, what are you doing with the Globe Theater right now? He's like, oh, we're we're reading Hamlet, and we're talking about staging and what it was like to stage in the Globe Theater. And I'm also having them design their own theater space and to think about like the decisions they would make and kind of what like sight lines they would have and angles and like why that would be a good theater space for whatever scene they had chosen. And I was like, hey, can I jump in on this? And he was like, yeah, of course you could jump in on this. So the first thing I had them do, we had just been starting to learn how to use GeoGebra. And so I kind of guided them through recreating the Globe Theater itself, which is a 20-sided polygon. So I found
20-sided polygon. What do we even call that? What is a
oh,
20-sided
it's a
polygon?
very
I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm going to chat GPT this while you're talking, but go right ahead.
So, kind of like use that as a way to teach them how to use the tool. Like I kind of did some like presenting, had them working, and so we all kind of recreated the theater, including like where the stage was and what it would look like and how there were seats behind the stage. And so we did a whole lot of like recreating that so they could use the tool. And then I had them like, okay, now use what you're doing in this other class to create your own theater here in and you're going to think about like angles now and you're going to think about like what kind of a polygon you want. Maybe you don't even want a polygon, or where are you going to put the seats. And then the theater teacher kind of got wind we were doing this And she jumped in. And so we have an enormous black box theater that's in the center of our campus.
So
And it's
cool.
designed to be flexible, and no seats are bolted to the ground. Everything is movable. And so we took our class down there and we actually set it up in like a 20-sided shape and had the students sit in different places, including behind the stage and in front. And some got up and like delivered some lines. And we really like kind of experienced what it might feel like to be in the middle of that shape. And it was just this crazy little project that came from seeing something on a desk and being in a place where I felt like I had the freedom to, okay, like I'm going to take a break from what I was going to cover, and
Yeah.
we're going to like go and do this instead. And we're going to pull in like three different classes, and we all just kind of put pause on what we had planned and kind of dove into this for about a week's time. But I think that's kind of connection. Like, real world can mean something like that. It doesn't need to mean like, am I going to use this in the grocery store? Right.
Yeah.
Like
Right.
like the Globe Theater, and some, people might think like that's not particularly real world. But if you think about like designing a space, like maybe someone's going to go into architecture, they need to think about angles and sight lines and, like what's that going to do to my neck if I'm sitting in this one space? So, and it also like, I think it, for the students, made them feel like, okay, like what I'm learning in this class is not independent of what I'm learning in this class. I have cross skills that can go, I can take it from my math class and it doesn't have to stay there. I can take it across the hall of humanities. I can take it down into the theater space. And I think in my past career at schools, I've been teaching in independent schools for almost 30 years now. Um, I never had the freedom to do things like this because you've got what, 17, 18 chapters you have to cover in that math textbook. And if you don't get through them, then the next teacher can't start where they need to start, which means the student won't eventually get to AP calculus, which means, your life is over.
Your life is over if you don't get to AP calculus.
And I think this is somebody who spent a lot of years teaching AP calculus, and I still teach higher level calculus, but that having the freedom to like make some kids who might not have seen themselves in a math classroom like see themselves, like a theater kid who's like, oh, like I love theater, and so now I love this unit we're doing in math. And like sometimes that's just the little in I need, so that when we're doing something maybe that they don't love quite as much, I've already like gained some trust and like understanding with them. So when we're doing like maybe the factoring unit, which they're not as excited about, we've already kind of established like, oh, this class is not irrelevant to me.
Oh, there's so much I want to dig into right there, where you were just saying about the trust, right? Because every student in your classroom is not going to love math every single day, and that is okay. It's a-okay. But what you said there, Jen, that I thought was so important was that you gained their trust through this one moment where you were like, this doesn't feel good, right? This chapter, this unit just doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel like I'm connecting with the kids. There was just something about it you didn't like, and you followed your intuition, and also you used your own like connection skills and listen to the teacher who was teaching the unit on the Globe Theater, and the theater teacher bringing in, and it really is a beautiful example of doing what we need to do for the students in a way that, I don't know, was it a hard work? Was it like, I mean, I know teachers are overstressed, right? They're like, okay, how can I do all of these things? But you also made a point about the other part that I wanted to talk about was, you said, we have to get through 17 chapters so that the next teacher can. And I think that narrative has is starting to bust out a little bit, because I've, over the years, even myself when I was a teacher, but over the years I hear teachers say, but if I don't get to chapter 14, then the sixth grade teacher or the fifth grade teacher can't blah, 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 pick up where I left off. And I'm like, is it about preparing everything in a nice, tidy box so the next teacher can have an easy time? Or is it for the kids, for the students, for our clients, for lack of a better word? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's so much of, even when I was in that system, where you'd get through it, and then the kids would get to the next year and they'd be like, yeah, I don't know if we studied that or not. Like, I don't really remember. And so, the next teacher ends up to some degree reviewing, reteaching some of it. But I find, if I get students from a previous teacher who come in and maybe they don't remember, this formula or this thing, but they know, once you show them the formula, they know how to plug things into it effectively. They know how to get an answer out the other side. They need to know how to reasonably check, does that answer make sense in context? So they have those deep skills of a mathematician, but it's not about I've memorized 400 formulas.
Right, because then they can go back to those competencies and determine what they're going to use and justify it with precision.
Yes.
It's makes so much sense. I've got that written down. I'm like, that makes so much sense, and it's so simple because we have the Common Core standards for mathematical practice, right? They've been around since the 2011, I believe, and then there's also the effective math teaching practices from the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, and both of those have valid competencies, if you will, but there's a lot of them, right? And here you're coming up with three really important competencies that can be used throughout any other subject. So I just love that. I know I keep coming back to that, but I think that's really important to drive home. And by the way, while you were talking, I did chat GPT. A 20-sided polygon is called an icosagon. Icosagon. It's
Okay.
ICOSAGON. AON. ON. Um, and it says where all sides and angles are equal, so it needs to be a regular icosagon. I don't know. I can't even pronounce that. But anyway, that's why we don't know what it is. But Shakespeare, maybe he knew what it was called. I don't
That's
know.
right.
Awesome. All right, so let's talk about so your students. So you mentioned how you had maybe a theater student who might have not seen math as a place where they belong, and now they've seen. Okay, now when I do get to the chapter on quadratics, they're a little bit more willing to trust the process. Can you think of a particular? Yeah, let's talk more about that.
Yeah, I think one of the things I really love about our school, but also can be a bit of a challenge in the classroom, is that we have students coming from a wide variety of backgrounds and a wide variety of kind of math levels coming in. And because we're small right now, you'll see in a single classroom, we don't track it all. So in a single classroom, we're going to get kids all over the map in both their love of math, their comfort in math, the history they're coming in with. I think we all know, as math teachers, we see a lot of students who come in with a lot of kind of traumatic math experiences. And so I always feel like my job at the beginning of the school year is just all about that building of trust and getting them to feel safe enough to make mistakes in front of me and to feel like they can take risks. And, it's I always say September is the quietest my classroom will ever be. And then it just gets increasingly noisy from that point onward. Um, and I'm someone who just kind of loves a noisy classroom. I love a little bit of chaos in the room where kids are doing all kinds of different things and using all different sort of modalities to access the material, because this works for them and this works for this, and these kids do best when they're in a group, and these ones always want to be standing at the board. And so kind of getting to know them is a big part of, and what they're going to need. And so that I can then prepare an array of options to them that suits that particular group. So, going back to the theater example, right, I had a group that was a particularly theater heavy sort of group that year. They were very creative types who wanted to be kind of performing and do that was kind of what their thing was. Where sometimes I might have another section that's not their thing at all, but they maybe, they like the science connection more. So it just trying to figure out what is that, tease out what is that thing that's what's my hook in here
Yes.
to get you invested in what we're going to be doing. Because I clearly do have things. We might not be as like tied to that, 17 chapters, whatever we want to call it. But there's still things like I feel like I need to get through and to teach them. But like, how can I do it in a way that it sort of feels relevant to them and that they feel that they can dive in and not be afraid of what the experience is going to be like.
That is awesome. So how do you tease that out? Like if you could give advice to a teacher who's like, oh my gosh, I've had many teachers who will come to me and say, well, how do I do this? How do I do that? How do I get my kids talking? How do I get right? But right now, what I'm really curious about, because there's a lot of chatter about, well, okay, how do we start the school year so that we have students, so that we can get the message through to the students that we really mean what we say when we say, you can make mistakes in my class. You can, there's a book called Rough Draft Math. I don't know if you've heard of it, but Amanda Jansen, she was on the podcast. This great book. It would actually be perfect for you. And she has in there that she actually pulled from a teacher whose classroom she was in. And it's called, I think it's something like the Bill of Rights, or the rights of the student, right? And one of them was, I have the right to change my mind. And I'm like, shouldn't we all have that right? So anyway, I'm sort of getting off track, but my question to you is, how do we tease out what it is that gets at those students?
Yeah, it's such a good question. It's also like a tricky question to answer. Um, there's a lot of, I think you have to do a lot of listening as a teacher, especially at the beginning of the year, and you have to stay really tuned in. You have to listen for the little things because it's often that little soft voice that will tell you something. And if that little soft voice gets ignored or glossed over, you may not hear from it again. Right. So I'm someone who tends to do a lot of they do a lot of active work in class. Like I try not to just be standing up at the board talking more than I have to. And so I do a lot of floating around the room and listening in on as they're talking to each other about things, and try to find those moments where you can like validate, like, yes, that's like the right way to be thinking about that. Like, good, like go in that direction. Or, oh, I can totally see what you're thinking there, but like look back at the example on the board, where you're like, even if you're correcting them and it's a way that like, oh, like I get why you thought to write that down, but like here's like, oh, and then like, oh, okay, and then like once it just takes a couple of the kids to start being brave, and then it like becomes contagious because they'll see someone bravely raise their hand, say something that's like wildly off base, and like I don't get mad, I don't get upset, like my demeanor with them doesn't change. I will re-explain if I need to, and then we just move on to like the next question. So, and then that student is more likely to ask again because like, oh, I asked, I was wrong, but nothing bad happened.
Yes. And it's said, and that powerful piece in there that you said, that other students are watching,
Yeah.
right? Other students are watching. And I see it even with my own children, right? If I act one way towards one, they're completely different humans, then the other one picks up on it. It's like, oh, well, maybe then that's going to happen, right? And it's the same thing with kids in the classroom. So there's so many opportunities. I see that as so many opportunities to model what we want students to see, and like, so that we can build their trust. Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so as we wrap this conversation up, this has been, I could talk to you all day. And I say that to most of my guests, but I really, really could, because I think you've got so many awesome ideas. So the question I asked, you already kind of answered the question about the listening of what to do, and advice to a teacher. What would be advice to a teacher? But the second question I always ask guests at the end is, what gives you hope in the math education space or in your classroom? What gives you hope?
Oh, there's so much I think that gives me hope. I think, about to start a new school year right now, right? And you're like, I don't know necessarily, I know some of the kids I'm going to be teaching because I've had them before, but not all of them, right? So you don't really know, like, what's it going to look like this year and how's it going to be? But, you know, year after year, I see these kids who walk in my door and maybe at the beginning are like, oh, like, I'm just going to tell you right now, like, I don't like math. I don't really want to be here. I have to take this class. But then they slowly start to like open up and to feel better about themselves. Because I really firmly believe a lot of students who say, I don't like math, are really saying, I feel uncomfortable in the math classroom, or I feel like I'm being judged. And because it's like there's a right answer and a wrong answer. So, like, I can't be wrong in here. And so they come in with so much fear. And if you can just like get through to the other side of that fear, then like the sky's the limit as to what you can do with them. And so that gives me so much hope because I see it. I see kids come every year into my classroom who feel not great about themselves and end up feeling good about themselves. And then they start taking more risks as a math student. Maybe they take an additional class the next year that where they were thinking like, this is it. This I'm done with my requirement and I'm out. But
Yeah.
they keep going. Or they like, even if they and never ends up being their thing, they they're not it's not their thing because they don't think that they can do it, right? It's not like nope, I just really like humanities better, which is fine. That's that I will never take offense at that. But don't turn away from math because you think you can't do it. Like if you know that you can but choose not to, I have no problem with that. But if you think you can't, I'm gonna keep picking at you until you can.
My job is not done until you shift your perspective on that one. Awesome. Well, Jen, it's been a lovely conversation. Thank you so much. Just to give a shout out to the school where you teach, can you just shout out the name again and then where people could find out more about the school?
Yeah, so we are New England Innovation Academy. We are in Marlborough, Massachusetts. We are grades 7 through 12, and we have both residential and boarding. So we have students both domestic and international. Yeah, and if you just like Google us, you can look us up. And yeah, we're always looking for new folks to join us who believe in kind of shaking up education and doing exactly the kind of things I was talking about here.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your time, Jen, and good luck as you start the school year. And definitely keep in touch.
Yes, definitely. Thank you for the
Thank you.
conversation.
Sure. I'm Pam Brett. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Blue Glasses Math. Please follow me wherever you get your podcasts and follow along on the conversation on Instagram. And remember, being a math person is all just a matter of perspective.